The Imperium of Man is a big boy, a hungry, growing boy, and like all big, hungry, growing boys, it needs to be fed. And it needs to be fed a lot. But what does an Imperium eat, you might ask? Well, first of all, thank you for asking, that's a very good question, and conveniently, it's also a great way to get straight to the point of this video. An Imperium eats people, men, women, children too, an alarming number of children, really. But it also eats raw minerals and unrefined resources in every conceivable form. Crops, proteins, minerals, liquids, gases, and other bounties mined from every classification of world you can think of. Some of these are technically drunk rather than eaten, but that's really besides the point. All of this is consumed. All of this goes in. Mined, cultivated, taxed, or stolen. These are the inputs to the Imperium. But consumption is only the beginning here, because eating is quite simple. You find and pick something up, you shovel it in, you chew and swallow. So it's not the inputs that we are going to explore today. Instead, I want to explore the process of Imperial digestion. Digestion, in contrast, is not simple. It's quite the mess, actually. The digestive system is immeasurably complex. It's a highly coordinated network of muscles and organs working through mechanical and chemical processes to move and break down the inputs, to absorb the nutrients and put them to good use, and to expel or eliminate the waste. So, what does the Imperium's digestive system look like? What is the process that delivers the Imperium's raw inputs, manpower, minerals, and materials across a fractured galaxy to the places they are most desperately needed? How does the Imperium track and manage its unwieldy supply chain while locked in endless interstellar wars, beset on every side by extinction-level threats, and paralyzed by its own dogma and decaying bureaucracy? Well, the answer, I would say, is that it doesn't. Not cleanly, not coherently, and certainly not efficiently. Despite the well-intentioned, if routinely mismanaged efforts of the Adeptus Administratum, the Departamento Munitorum, and the various other agencies, trade cartels, and merchant dynasties that keep things moving, the Imperial logistical apparatus operates less like a well-oiled machine and more like a senile old man refusing to take his meds. Confusing, unpredictable, fragile, and just quite sad. The importance of logistics in any civilization is difficult to overstate. You have likely heard the maxim attributed to the ancient petty king and Frankian warlord Napoleon, "An army marches on its stomach," and maybe also the more extreme, though not entirely inaccurate saying, recovered from the writings of the ancient Terran scribe Alfred Henry Lewis in late M2. There are only 9 meals between mankind and anarchy. The point behind both is the same. Civilization is frighteningly fragile. All it takes for that to become obvious is for food, goods, or equipment to become unreliable, scarce, or simply harder to source. Compound this fragility with the pressure of external threats and, well, things won't be looking too hot. This is true even for societies bound to a single world, supported by instant global communication and relatively stable supply chains. Missed shipments can cripple businesses, empty shelves can trigger public panic. Scale that fragility up to the level of the Imperium, where interstellar travel takes years or decades, where warp storms isolate systems for centuries, and where clerks, scriveners, and officials die waiting for supplies or replies that arrive late, arrive at the wrong time or place, if they even arrive at all. For this reason, logistics within the Imperium cannot be understood as a purely military concern. While war machines, weapons, and troops dominate most discussions, and rightly so, as the Imperial war machine is most definitely of the highest priority, the most destructive failures can often occur in civilian supply. Hive worlds will stall for lack of imported oils while its citizens thirst, their water reserves long sold off to cool the engines of passing fleets. Meanwhile, agri-worlds can act as graveyards for their own harvests, buried in mountains of surplus, rotting grain. While one world descends into starvation and cannibalism, another watches its harvest rot. One world praying for food, the other praying for the ships to come and take it away. The common community imagination often depicts imperial supply as a single continuous process. Goods are requested, produced, loaded, and dispatched through the warp, delayed probably, but ultimately delivered in some form or another. This is a gross oversimplification. In reality, the provisioning of the Imperium is a largely reactionary and disjointed affair. It is a process made up of many severed links, each with its own risks, choke points, and each riddled with the ever-present threat of total loss. First, naturally, there must be the request. And how else can such a plea be transmitted across a star-spanning Imperium of a million worlds, if not through astropathic communication? Astropaths, specialist psychers, are the primary means by which the Imperium maintains interstellar contact. Through immense psychic exertion, they project messages across vast distances of space. The process is punishing, demanding ritual discipline and sustained focus simply to keep the psychers or psychic choir's mind intact during transmission. Even then, the messages themselves are rarely clear. Astropaths do not communicate in words or numbers per se, but through symbols, icons, impressions, and dreams, forms so abstract that even the most accomplished among their order struggle to interpret what they receive. Thus, a warning of an orc invasion might appear as a glistening imperfection in fish entrails, a looming cloud of smoke, bleeding orifices, or a worrying combination of runes or sigils within a holographic matrix. As a result, few astropathic messages arrive cleanly. Those that can be translated require careful, time-consuming interpretation through augury and symbolic reference, while many are never deciphered at all. Others are received far from where they are needed, forcing the message to be relayed through multiple different astropathic choirs, each pass degrading the signal and its meaning, increasing the risk of dangerous misinterpretation to the point where some may never arrive in any meaningful form. The point is this: before any response can even be considered, the request may already be delayed, distorted, or misunderstood, or maybe lost entirely. It's basically a massive game of galactic telephone. Yet when a request is received and understood, when reinforcements, supplies, or equipment are finally authorized for transport in response, following a tortuous and risk-fraught administrative process that we will touch on soon, the next ordeal begins. Cargo must be lifted into orbit or transferred to the void, a colossal task in itself, before being loaded onto waiting vessels or assembled into larger convoys. This process is continually hampered by overcrowded docks, failing infrastructure, crew shortages, and overlapping authorities, all of which create chronic and unavoidable bottlenecks. From there, shipments undertake extended sublight transits to warp translation points, moving slowly through regions where merchant vessels, often lightly armed and poorly escorted, make tempting prey for Xenos pirates, raiders, and other opportunists. Warp travel is what comes next. Many seem to only understand the warp in the broadest sense. They understand that gods and demons dwell there, that it can corrupt, possess, and drive people mad, and that traveling through it is dangerous. They may know of how ships transiting the warp can be left spinning blind, their navigators dead from exertion, or caught in wicked currents as they try to ride the storm tides of unreality. But what I find often gets missed is how the warp's constant instability compounds over time, and how those disruptions ripple through the Imperium's supply chain to make matters worse. To enter the warp is an inherently dangerous and unpredictable act. Even the most widely and commonly used passages through it, routes charted and rated by the navigator houses, are classified only as semi-fluctuating, a classification that tells us more than enough. There are no truly stable routes through the warp, only paths that fail less often and which have a slightly lower degree of unpredictability. Records from proxy and trader fleets operating in the Nephilim sector give great context to this point. Even along a comparatively short, well-charted passage, some 22% of expeditions do not arrive at their destination, with numbers only growing worse with longer journeys. Ships will vanish outright through their transit in the warp. Others will arrive decades, centuries, or millennia late. More troubling and morbidly interesting still are those that arrive early. The Infinite and the Divine gives us an example of one such incident. No one expected the fleet to arrive that year. That was how it went with warp travel. The tides of the Imperium tore at the natural order of the universe. Through the strange eddies of the warp, this fleet had arrived decades before the time when it had left anchor. Now try to picture the flow-on effects from this and how it shatters any hope for coherent logistical planning. The implications are quite hard to fully explore and articulate. Ship crews arrive at destinations to find themselves in a time that predates their own births. Armies are sent to fight wars that have not yet begun, or that never occur at all. Regiments are reinforced after they have already been destroyed or resupplied decades before they are raised. Supplies reach worlds that have no immediate need for them or arrive too early to be stored, logged, or even recognized, doomed to rot in warehouses because the relevant forms haven't been made or printed yet. On the other hand, the subjective time experienced by those traveling the warp is totally different from that which passes in the Materium. What feels like weeks in the Immaterium may translate to decades in reality. Crews may arrive withered by age, or effectively replaced by their own shipborne descendants, delivering goods that are now outdated, rusted, or rotten. For the individuals involved, this creates a living paradox. In such cases, time itself has effectively failed. Planning fractures, timetables lose meaning, and cause and effect begin to blur. Putting aside the inevitable consequences of this reality and the disruption to the timeline itself causes, which will need someone far smarter than me to even begin to fully appreciate, even for those vessels that can emerge from the warp unscathed, with their minds intact at the right place and at the right time, the risks are still plentiful. It is dangerous for spacecraft to leave warp space close to the proximity of stars. The mass of a solar body possesses a comparable mass in warp space and acts as an irresistible attractive force to bodies near it. This makes it almost impossible to leave or re-enter normal space within a solar system without being drawn inside the sun itself. Even with the utmost care, occasional accidents do happen, and this is one of the constant dangers of warp travel. Arrive too close to another ship or station, death. Arrive too close to a solar or planetary body, death and destruction. Rogue Star by Andy Hoare gives us a great example to work with, whereby a bulk carrier attempting warp entry rather than emergence though the result would be mirrored either way, mistimed its translation and intersected the gravity well of a nearby moon. The vessel broke apart as it crossed the dimensional threshold, its mass stretched and shot across multiple realities by unimaginable forces, leaving a scattered debris field that enveloped the moon and spread into the upper atmosphere of a nearby inhabited world. Beyond just this physical destruction, the event generated thousands of micro-scale warp breaches, exposing the nearby planet's population to brief but direct contact with the warp. Within hours, hundreds of thousands were driven insane by the exposure, resulting in the intervention of the Inquisition, who soon arrived to purge those exposed, burning clean an entire continent in the process. This is the nature of warp travel. This is the issue to be faced in navigation across the Imperium. And for the ships that survive the transit, the nightmare simply repeats in reverse. Upon arrival, they arrive at the nearest Mandeville point, facing days or weeks of sublight travel, where threats slowly shift from opportunists to corrupt system monitors and predatory customs officials looking to collect their own rather informal tithes. Once orbit is finally achieved, the gridlock resumes. Offloading is paralyzed by broken shuttle fleets, failing orbital elevators, and the petty feuds of local dock gangs, meaning that cargo which survived the hell of the warp often sits there just rotting on the deck, held hostage by the very infrastructure meant to receive it. This is partly why the Imperium does not expand cleanly or evenly, why some sectors are fed and protected, and why others are lost. Why the Imperium supply chain is such a nightmare to manage. I say partly not because of the miscommunication, bottlenecks, physical threats, and departmental overlaps I mentioned earlier, but because of more general, equally catastrophic administrative screw-ups caused by the administratum. I would not be taking too big of a leap to say that the average administratum scrivener, through a career spanning decades, very well could be responsible for more deaths than any general or admiral, any Astartes or Primarch. The ignorant, grotesquely mismanaged power held in those countless pale, ink-stained hands is almost without equal. We need only look to 15 hours, where a single clerical error, one misentered digit, results in a newly recruited, under-equipped, and wholly inexperienced guard company being deployed to a grinding, nightmarish, orc-infested war zone instead of the minor uprising they were originally meant to help suppress, resulting in catastrophic, total losses. Or we can look to Guns of Tanith, where the Munitorum shipped 800 crates of incompatible standard size 5 power cells instead of the urgently needed standard size 3 power cells, leaving the Tanith regiment critically undersupplied right before a major assault. And in the Watcher in the Rain audio drama, we learn of one deranged scribe who intentionally submitted incorrect forms and falsified logistical data, diverting food shipments to incorrect coordinates, causing it to spoil before arrival and leading to starvation or mass executions for cannibalism. Functioning equipment was confused with broken stock, consigning soldiers to die on the front lines with unusable weapons, while manufacturers missed their quotas and are forced to assemble what little they can by hand. Her unnoticed daily sabotage continued for years, resulting in the deaths of what must be millions. The administratum is out of its depth. Its remit is impossibly vast, its responsibilities are unfathomably great, and the consequences of its failures are staggering. This dysfunction is often explained through the banality of evil, the mindless obedience to procedure, the quiet fulfillment of orders without reflection on their outcomes. And I would say that that explanation has some merit, but a more convincing cause lies elsewhere. Somewhere rooted in fear, and in the realities and limitations of the system itself. I say fear first because it is the fear of punishment that drives many scribes, scriveners, and officials to conceal their mistakes. Errors are buried rather than corrected, misfiled rather than confessed, because punishment, reassignment, or execution are the likely rewards for honesty, and so the hope for survival encourages silence, which only compounds the impact of any errors made. But fear alone does not explain the scale of the failure, and the deeper issue is structural. The administratum is disgustingly mismanaged, this is true, but it is also being crushed beneath the ridiculousness of its own processes. It still relies on physical forms, handwritten records, and parchment decrees in numbers that are literally unfathomable. As described in Avenging Sun, there are towering piles of papers heaped up seemingly without care, and uncountable numbers of vellum and paper scrolls that stretch away until they vanish into the distance. These are not metaphors or exaggerations. If anything, these quotes undersell the point. There are genuine oceans of documentation within administratum archives, piles of paper stacked atop foundations of records thousands of years old. Entire micro-societies exist within these oceans of text. Gangs, clans, and literal data miners who carve out territories among tunnels and structures made of compressed parchment. Their lives are spent tunneling through these mountains and oceans, desperately hunting for misfiled documents in exchange for payment from administratum officials. How then can anyone reasonably expect anything more than the bare minimum from such an organization? That any resource, reinforcement, or resupply ever reaches its intended destination within the Imperium at the correct time is nothing short of a miracle. And even that miracle seems to be reserved for the most desperate, high priority, and high profile requests. Everything else is left to run the gauntlet of delays, misfilings, and quiet neglect that seem to define the administratum. And this is just what is known. Try to imagine the unknown. Consider what has been successfully lost. For every recorded disaster, there are surely thousands that never warrant investigation or are never found to be linked to the true cause of administrative incompetence. Birth records misfiled, leading to entire generations declared legally non-existent. Death certificates delayed or lost, keeping families and communities bound to labor quotas long after the bodies of their loved ones have been processed and repurposed. Only rarely is this the result of evil or malice brought about by the intent of bad actors. Comparatively few administrative orders explicitly condemn millions to suffer needlessly. Instead, these realities occur because the system that exists fosters an environment where individuals are too afraid to admit error, and where the organization is too burdened by its own infrastructure to correct itself, or simply too enormous to notice. And maybe this is key. Maybe we expect and demand the impossible from an organization charged with the survival of a civilization the size of the Imperium. Quadrillions of souls and millions of worlds rely upon this entity. A leviathan with its hands bound by its own convoluted processes and by the ancient traditions and crushing expectations of the greater Imperium. Every planet depends on imports or exports to either meet the tithe requirement or maintain livability, functionality, protection, and connectivity. Every war requires some degree of resupply, reinforcement, or redeployment. Troops need to shoot, and people need to eat. But we must again give consideration to the scale of what we are talking about. not just in terms of the trillions of fighting units, the enormity and drama befitting the movement, deployment, resupply, and support of Titan and Night engines, a topic which likely deserves its own dedicated video. The logistical demands placed on the Imperium are measured in billions of requisitions and trillions of shipping containers every solar year. But there is never enough tonnage, never enough escort vessels, never enough navigators. The fleets are overworked and underprotected. So let's return to our starting analogy. We asked what the Imperium eats, and we looked at how it digests. If we judge the Imperium's digestive system by any modern or rational standard, the diagnosis is terminal. The arteries are clogged with parchment, the nerves are scrambled by the warp and by distance, and vital organs are failing from neglect all over. By all rights and by all laws of logistics, this body should have starved, withered, and died millennia ago. But it doesn't, or at least it hasn't, yet. Even with the questionable method of communication, the hurdles that disrupt supply before any cargo leaves port, the dimensional paradoxes at play, the very real chance of catastrophic clerical and administrative errors, all on top of opportunistic enemies, crumbling infrastructure, stagnant technologies and processes, bureaucratic and political nonsense, it is still limping onwards. But for how long? Who's to say? Anyway, thanks for watching Dystopian Chimp.